Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be talking for a couple minutes here with Benjamin Shields from the Right Media YouTube channel. We're going to discuss distractions going on in the mainstream media that are going to try to explain away all these food price rises. And you're going to start to see this repeatedly across the planet again and again and again as the media tries to give you an excuse so you don't even question what's going on. You'll say, yeah, that makes sense. Just things are going up because of X, Y, or Z factor. You just expect that. And from time to time, he and I are also going to dissect the media and overlay the grand solar minimum with what you're seeing in the daily news headlines. Hope you get something out of our conversation. Yeah, and also we can take it to the next level, and I like to talk about off-Earth types of thoughts because we are we're at the level of being in a galactic society pretty much. So let's take it off Earth for a second. I have a lot of people talk to me on my channel and say, hey, what happens if our power grid goes down because of an EMP or because of a
Yeah,
solar
I
flare?
haven't heard of
What
that.
happens to Carrington event? I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Carrington event. Huge solar flare that fried the telegraph cables. People always say, well, what happens if the grid fries again? Another, huge Carrington event type event. Well, the way it's going now, the quantum satellite network is going to take the blockchain transmission and all the hash power above our heads into a satellite network. So if anything happens terrestrially, everything's still, they're going to shut those satellites down as the energetic particles, the wave passes our planet here, the shock wave, and then start it back up again. I mean, terrestrially, yeah, things may go down because those lines carry on a charge, an extra couple volts per kilometer. I mean, that's gonna. But if you're talking about taking it into a satellite system there, they could actually turn those off, and with today's technology, they can harden them, and we could still have. China's rolling out this quantum satellite network as we speak. The blockchain is going to be above your head, not on the Earth. You have to get that. This thing in itself is some sort of AI that's rolling out on its own volition to become its own sentient thing, but it is putting itself
Yeah,
above the earth. And this whole blockchain, cryptocurrency, and the technology we're moving into is, it is sci-fi. It
that's
is
funny because I
sci-fi.
think back to a video I did connected globally, like it surrounds the entire globe, and it's just a network of satellites up in the stratosphere or wherever, I don't know, up above the Earth. Eric Schmidt is not someone that I would probably. I mean, he's gone from Alphabet and Google and all that now, but not someone I genuinely trust. But definitely saw
You see,
into
they saw the
what the
future
future
too.
will be like. I mean, he pretty much left it was like the day after Trump signed that executive order with the 13 names of the
Yeah, and you might ask the
people
question, where is he now? Do you know?
that were committing human rights violations, and I don't know. I haven't heard much about him since then. There have been a few people actually that kind of just disappeared after that. Makes you wonder.
Yeah, it really does. When you talk about this transhumanist movement and going into this AI reality, and who are the defenders of it and who are the purveyors of it, and where do we draw this line between enslaving humanity as one thing in a physical form, but
Yeah,
enslaving it into
yeah, it definitely does.
a psychological, a digital, and then into a flesh form is something totally different. I mean, the line needs to be drawn somewhere. When you're trying to couple all those together
Yeah,
into the
that's
enslavement,
what
that's
I'm
pretty
trying to get
different.
to a point built. It's an AI that's literally built off of the consciousness of every individual person, but it's all collected electronically and it's transmitted in that way. And the AI learns off of everybody. Oh man, that's a crazy concept to try to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it's almost as if there's two Earths going on at the same time. The electronic Earth, that's the internet and all these,
Yeah, and then even
systems
like
you're
the
talking
natural
about, and the
world with the cycles,
supercomputers
and you
as
have
minds
I mean,
themselves.
everything just kind of moving, we're the reason that, all these changes are happening. And it's like, well, it's two separate things that you're trying to, mesh together.
And when you do look at history, and if you look into catastrophism,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what we do to this planet. What can happen naturally just dwarfs by, thousands and thousands and thousands of times, literally, of what the human could do to destroy this planet. Outside or inside influences, volcanism, the Toba volcano. Are you kidding me? That cooled our planet for 40 years. cut down every last tree, we could only do literally a fraction of the damage what Toba did. Lake Toba in Indonesia, on Sumatra Island. That ash circulated out where it dropped inches deep around the North Pole. That's how much stuff
That's
came out.
insane.
You got to think about what the effect be on crops anywhere else. You're talking about a 2-inch ash rainout in the North Pole from something that erupted on the equator 20 years prior. I don't care what you're doing with CO2 or methane. That is nothing in comparison. Nothing. And you talk about the Younger Dryas, one of these cometary impacts on the ice sheets that actually ended society in a single day. The Carolina Bays, from these giant chunks of ice flown up 200,000 feet into the air and then came back down and, boom, gouged thousands, 50, 100,000, 5 million of these Carolina Bay impacts from the ice being shattered off the ice sheets from cometary impact. That was only 11,500 years ago. And you're trying to say that a little CO2 is bothering the planet? Nah, you got to look at just even those two events alone, 11,500 years ago with the Younger Dryas, and then the Toba eruption 70,000 years ago.
Yeah, one of the
just
things that I heard, we wouldn't have to burn fossil fuels if there wasn't a small band where humans could actually live comfortably and we didn't need AC or heat, And if we didn't have to scrounge for food, in the early years of man, and now we're at a point where we have starvation in third world countries. I mean, it's like the planet's awful tough on us, and I think it can handle quite a bit. I mean, just judging by some of the past cycles that Earth has gone through, what we're going through now isn't really that, or like what people are saying, humans have done to the Earth. It's not really that big compared to what's happened already.
And you come back to that point of the energy usage. We don't need to burn fossil fuels. We never did. Let's go back to Nikola Tesla's inventions. Are you kidding me? For the last 110 years, 120 years, we never needed to burn fossil fuels, ever, even once. We could have perfected magnetic motors, and they're not perpetual motion machines. See, that's what I don't like. I really don't like that word perpetual motion machine.
Yeah.
Because it's not a perpetual motion machine. I mean, the energy that's feeding our magnetosphere, that's driving our magnetic field on the planet, comes from somewhere else. I mean, when you're talking about just something that's free energy, I'm sorry, it's not. It's coming from outside our solar system on the Birkeland currents and the plasma streams coming into our sun. It is not free energy. The energy is coming from somewhere else outside our solar system as well. And they don't get you to try to think of these causations going back. Oh, it's a free med, it'll never work. It's free. What do you mean free energy? I can't imagine perpetual motion. No. I mean, if something else along the current stopped, that motion would stop as well. I mean, the powering of whatever magnetism on our sun, they try to make you spin something on a desk that doesn't spin forever and think, well, it doesn't work. That power from the galactic core, that power, you know how many galaxies there are? 500 billion stars just inside our Milky Way galaxy. But we are one of 2 trillion galaxies. And you're trying to tell me that there's no other power sources that can continue to fire up our sun and continue to push plasma streams and currents of ions and energetic particles that push this and make our Earth's magnetic field run? They brainwashed you to think that perpetual motion is not possible, but it's not perpetual motion. It's powered by something else outside. But magnetically, it still works, and it will indefinitely, as long as you're alive and your grandparents are alive. This paradigm of using magnetic motors to drive something will absolutely work.
It's always like, free motion's a dream and a dumb one at best. And it's like, well, okay, I never thought of it like, well, it's not actually free energy, or perpetual motion. It's being pulled from somewhere. It's just off world to a degree. I know that dark matter makes up more than actual matter, but I don't know about plasma. I didn't really hear about that.
Okay, well, that plasma is inside everything you're taught about. The whole field that holds everything together is plasma. It's an electric universe, so everything's operating on electromagnetism, regardless of distance from galaxy to galaxy. It's in a plasma stream. You get that fourth state of matter, plasma. It is everything that we understand outside of our atmosphere. Our sun, how does that generate a magnetic field if it's only internally combusting? If it's just a fire from within the sun, how does it generate a magnetic field? It's impossible. It can't. Light a campfire and see how much magnetism comes off your campfire. Fire up a furnace to smolt metal and see how much magnetism comes out of that furnace. It doesn't. So you have to look at other drivers inside of literally the cosmos works. Heat does not create magnetism and electricity. Yep. I mean, it happens on volcanic eruptions where you get some electric effects coming out where you see the lightning bolts coming down in the ash clouds, but that's about as far as it goes. So the electric universe is coming out, being proven more and more each day, and I'm in the way I'm going to guarantee, and I'll say this on the record, within the next 10 years, or even less because of this grand solar minimum, almost everything that you've ever learned about science and the way our sun operates will have been proven false, that a new paradigm of how our star, it is a star, how it keeps everything intact in our solar system and how it's connected to other solar systems and how this is within the galaxy itself electromagnetically connected. Because you can't tell me that the sun just suddenly drops in temperature enough to freeze the planet. I thought it was supposed to burn at a static rate.
Yeah.
It can't go through the 11-year variable cycle. Okay, let's even go back to the simplest of things. Just the regular solar cycle that we talk about. And you understand that the 11-year solar cycle, right? And it goes from solar maximum to solar minimum, and then it comes back up again and it comes back. And that's a 22-year cycle from top to bottom and bottom to top again. That is an electrical signature. And then within that, when you're talking about 11-year cycles and you multiply those out and you're coming back in the 207-year cycle and you come into the 400, you're looking at like 36 of those cycles to come into a grand solar minimum. And then 36 is a sacred number. And this is the most interesting thing, looking back at ancient history.
Yeah, I think I've seen those graphs before. It takes
36 of these 11-year cycles to equal a grand solar minimum. And they find this on the wave pattern as well. It's an electromagnetic signature, almost like an EKG that you would see in a hospital from a heart patient. I'll actually direct you to these graphs. For anybody listening out there, you need to look at Valentina Zarkova, and that's spelled Zarkova. And then also the other authors on the paper were Shepard, Shepard, and then her husband Zarkov, Zarkov, and Potpov, Potpov. And then their paper was titled The Electric Double Dynamo of the Sun. And it talks about there's different layers within the sun and the magnetism of the sun. It's almost like the easiest way I can explain it is the hemispheric layers in the sun cancel each other out every 400 years. Once they do that, the sun goes into an incredibly inactive state. And with that state, our magnetosphere also decreases because we have to match it electromagnetically as our planet too, because we have a core inside. And this, magnetic field around our planet is driven by the sun. So if the sun decreases in its output state, our Earth also needs to, lessen its charge, if you will. We're like cosmic capacitors, basically, is the easiest way to explain. So when the charge comes down, our magnetosphere weakens because there's nothing charging it. So also our planet needs to, shall we say, lessen its charge. So when you start to see these massive electrical storms, that is nothing more than upper atmospheric lightning tried to compensate and balance.
When the sun is losing charge almost, then the Earth has to, follow suit and do the same thing. Just that whole thinking of it in that way, I think is really helpful. And it would, be useful for people to start thinking of things in that way instead of, like you said, the way that we do already. We already have this idea of what the globe is, and we don't consider anything beyond, our Earth.
You don't. You've been trained not to. The technology at our fingertips turns you into a god today, literally. The way you look at the sun. Now, I really want to go out on a tangent here for a moment. The satellite view that you have of the sun is almost as if you could put the entire sun inside your hand, or even less inside your fingertips, like the size of a marble. And that's literally the view you have on this of the sun today is you as a giant putting the sun in between your forefinger and your thumb, just like you would a small marble, and being able to look at it and zoom it in close and zoom out at it wide. Now, what kind of fourth dimensional or fifth dimensional large being would you need to be to put an object that's 1,000,000 miles in circumference in between something that's the size of a marble and view it like that?
Yeah.
You would have to be some kind of being that would be 100 million miles or more large, maybe 200 million miles wide being yourself to pick up the sun and look and view at it like that.
The way that people think about
Synthesize
certain
it.
things, because it's so homogenous. You have one person that really looked at it, or a group, and then they summarized it, and then they gave it to everyone else and said, yeah, no, this is the way you look at the world. This is the way things are.
When it comes to news stories too, they call it false news. Hey, I summarized it the way I wanted to. It's your responsibility as an informed individual to discern if that's correct or incorrect. Look at the information, backtrack the links, do your own research, and say yes or no for you. I don't need anybody to tell me it's false news. I will find it's false news by just looking at the fact myself. And this whole false news narrative that's flowing around the globe.
You know, what reality is. I mean, the more that, you can peel back the veil of that and look at what's really going on, the better I think everybody will be. For me, really, is provide another thing to tie everything into and say, okay, well, this is happening because, there's going to be crop loss and they're covering with this. And this is really helpful information to know.
You have the whole edge of the entire distraction medium that they're putting out there, why they're doing it, the players inside it.
Yeah, we're talking, 6 years. Yeah.
Calling them out for what they're doing on it. It's so obvious in your arena there what's going on. The population losses over to 2024. We're not talking that far out in time. How far is 2024 from now? We're talking about 6 years. The minimum losses that they're looking at are 2 billion people. 2 billion. You have to realize that's 1/4 of our population. But I want to pull back in history too. When we talk about the Maunder minimum, it's not widely circulated in the media that 25%, 25, 1/4 of the world's population perished at that time. And let's bring it up into the Dalton minimum. We figured the 1810s, 1815, that's more modern era. When the Dalton minimum came across, 10% of the world's population died. 10%. From the same exact things we're talking about. And I encourage you to look at the Dalton minimum, the Sporer minimum, and the Maunder minimum. And specifically look at the population losses based on the same things. It's always the same 3 things in the fingerprint. Population migration. You find massive population migrations during this time. Global food crop losses and economy evaporating.
Yeah.
So obviously the food crop losses are the first, but then is it the population migration that causes the economics, or is it the economics that causes the population migration? But somewhere in there, the food is first and foremost.
Because, there are certain things that I come across my news feed every day.
That's where your expertise comes in.
That's really interesting, moving towards people realizing that, there's going to be some pretty bad things going on. So I would love to, go through, make a list of some different things and just how they tie into everything that you're doing.
I don't know. I can't say it enough. I really believe that this is really the most important issue of our time coming forward, because everything politically moving around this is going to be centered. The reason for everything happening on the planet is going to be based on everything of the crop losses.
All these different things going on, and it's like, wow. It's like finally having your eyes open and realizing it. And then I realized that kind of tunes into the cosmic rays. People are saying that it's a product of this, I don't know, have you ever heard of the planet Nibiru or something that's supposedly going to crash into Earth? I don't know. It's like one of those end of the world kind of things, but they say I think it's 2 years or something, or a year maybe. It's supposed to be like the end of the world, and they're saying it's why all the volcanoes are erupting. We have the earthquakes, and it's like, no, it's, it all has to do with the sun. It has to do with the cosmic rays. It's not this other terrestrial body out there. And that's one that jumps to mind, right off the bat. But another, I guess, is just the economic struggles in general. When you see economies collapse, I mean, if you look at Venezuela, I think they're at a point now where their food prices are skyrocketing. And granted, a lot of that is because of the policies that they have. Because I say it's because of the policies, because it's the same thing. It mirrors, a lot of the other, I don't even want to say regimes, but just countries throughout history that have adopted the same policies as Venezuela. You see them, you get mass starvation, mass die-off, the economies crumble. And even when you look at some places in the first world, I mean, we see that, and people tend to attribute it to something that people are doing. Like we like to jump at, we like to blame people basically. And we like to blame things that we can tangibly change, because then we feel, less helpless, I guess, in the face of the tragedy. But when you look at something like crop loss and the grand solar minimum, it's like, oh, well, we can't do a whole lot about that except be prepared. And, most people, they don't want to hear, well, you got to tighten down your bootstraps and be prepared for what's about to come. They want to hear, well, no, just blame this person over here and blame these rich people who, I don't know, for something. I don't know. It's always blame the rich people for this new thing of the week. It seems like you, especially like with economic failure, it's like economies collapse at a certain point. I'd be really interested to look at some of the more notable regimes throughout history and when they finally fell. Like if that ties in with the grand solar minimum, or if that's perhaps an actual product of the system of government that's set up in that nation. Because I think that it does have a certain degree to do with the system set up, but I think that more than people might think, and perhaps to a very large degree, it has to do with, out of world things like the sun.
I lived in China for several years. I used to work over there. I speak Chinese. I went to university in China for a year to learn Chinese. I ended up putting up the ice core data for the GISP2 set on top of the collapse of the Chinese dynasties for the last 1,000 years. You can find this one in any search engine. Just put Chinese dynasty collapse, David Dubai, and you'll find that one in there. But I overlapped these two different data sets on top of each other. And yes, I found that exact correlation that you're talking about with at least the collapse of the Chinese dynasties when temperatures dropped.
Yeah.
And you find another statistical thing which is really interesting too, just a side note, but no dynasty in China has ever lasted more than 400 years. And they call it the mandate from heaven. So when a ruler or an emperor comes into power, they get the mandate from heaven. And it's really interesting how they call it the mandate from heaven. But then once the mandate from heaven leaves, they're no longer allowed to rule. But every single time, it always ends up exactly what you're talking about. It's always infighting, inflation, crop losses, drought, and civil upheaval. And then the new mandate from heaven is set, and then everything restabilizes.
Yeah, I'm 23.
Well, we're going to go through the same thing again. I mean, we're going to go through a tumultuous 20 years here. Your mind frame totally changes when you know that you're in charge of your own reality. And cryptocurrency is the same way. You're in charge of your own banking. You need to take responsibility for those private keys. If you lose your password or lose your key, that's your fault, man. You just lost your money.
One of the things that I've really stayed away from talking about on the channel for the most part is Darwinism. And it's something that I adamantly believe in.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not even the problem that I see a lot with that is that people take it to an extreme where they think, oh, Darwinism. So, if you break your leg and you can't work, then you just die. And it's like, well, no, that's a vast oversimplification. But it's like, well, it's just a matter of, not stealing from someone, but you're still living in the society. Like, I don't know if you've ever read Murray Rothbard. He wrote a book, Anatomy of the State, and he said that man on his own can't rise above the level of brute creation without the social state. And a lot of it is because, there are certain things that you just can't get on your own. It's the same reason science builds on science from previous generations. It's because, if you were starting over fresh every single time, you'd never get anywhere. And it's like, it's the same thing with Darwinism, where it's like, okay, if you break your leg, but you're valuable enough to the social state, then somebody else will see it of value to prop you up and help you. And it's the same kind of thing with, food and the grand solar minimum and trying to get humanity through this. More or less. I mean, you don't really have a choice. At some point, you won't really have a choice but to say, well, people are pretty much thrown to the wolves. You need to survive. People are going to look at that and be like, well, what do you mean? Like, that's terrible to just have people try to survive on their own. It's like, well, you don't have to survive on your own. Work with other people, make a group collective, and really try to get through this with everybody on board. That's where I think the media is being so detrimental, because they're just not letting people get on board together. They're pushing people like you and me aside as conspiracy theorists and saying, we're on an island of our own, and people who watch the news, they know what's really going on. They know, we got to put down the carbon taxes, and we got to stop the fossil fuels and prop up alternative energies with wasted tax dollars, but it's not there. And that's why, I mean, I do my channel for a lot of the same reason that you do yours. It's just to educate people and get them to realize what's going on, and things are not as they seem. I was talking to my mom this morning, and I told her, I was like, that the polar ice caps are getting bigger, and there's more polar bears now than there were in the 70s. She's like, well, I heard that the polar bears are dying out and the ice caps are melting. And I was like, yeah, but that's not true. Like, they're flat out lying to you when they say that. I think it's gotten so bad. It's gotten to the point where the media just doesn't even care. This was something, to go on a little bit of a tangent, this is something I've thought about extensively, and I've tried to put into words a couple times. They create, when you look at, and I say they, it's like it's the media, it's the elites, it's the big bankers, the people with money. They create a worldview for people because, I mean, they control sensory input, probably 80% to 90% of sensory input for people on a day-to-day basis. And when you control that amount, I mean, you get people to a point where their worldview is now not only faulty in certain areas, but it's faulty in a complete cycle. All the way around, it's just faulty, and it builds off of one another. So if the weather starts getting warmer, they say, well, it's because of the extremely, toxic businesses, and the environmental regulations aren't strong enough, and we need these taxes. And then then they listen to Al Gore, and he confirms exactly what they say. And then they turn on the news and confirms exactly what they say. But then they don't actually look at the global weather patterns. They don't actually look at the grand solar minimum. They don't even think about it. And it's because they feel like they don't have to. It's really damaging to get society to that point. They're going to overpower any force that was going to oppose them. I think the problem is that they've taken people from like forcefully getting them to do something with, by holding a gun to their head. And now it's like, well, instead of externally holding the gun to their head, it's like, let's just manipulate the way that they think, and then they'll hold the gun to their head themselves. And I mean, if you wanted to bring the entertainment industry into this, I think the entertainment industry has really helped to push people off the deep end, just distracting people constantly from really becoming fulfilled in their life. And I get that's a very vague statement, but it's like you get people distracted from living a meaningful life. It's really damaging.
Yeah, I'll agree with that because, I don't know, the distraction these days for people growing up, and the social media pressure and all, and there's just so much these days. Yeah, let me throw a strange thought at you here. I don't know, do you know Christian Westbrook? He runs Ice Age Farmer. Well, Christian, he is all about cricket farming, but he says the solution is to farm crickets, not for eating for me and you, but for those same animals, or protein source for those animals to grow faster. He talks about rabbit farming, chicken farming, guinea pig farming, and all these things to feed them crickets that you can grow based on microgreens in the house that you can protect so you can get a crop. And they even eat the base of what you would throw away, basically. Okay, so for us, when we grow microgreens, they go 3-4 inches tall, and you cut. You can wait for the second round, you cut again, you wait for the third round, and pretty much that base is deleted at that time, especially if you're just growing in water. Well, a lot of those animals, especially chickens or whatever, they'll eat all of that. Goats too, man, they'll eat anything. They pick around everything. So after you grow your crop, you can still feed all this, but then the crickets will eat everything because they eat fiber. So he's trying to do it in a loop system where you take as a human everything that you need to clip off for the microgreens growing. You give it out to the next set of animals down, whether that be chickens or goats, whatever they don't eat. That's still a form of, could be coconut fiber or something that the other animals didn't eat. Give it to the crickets because they like to eat all that stuff. Once you have the crickets, then you have a protein source, and you feed them back to the animal.
People don't do a good job, and this was something I realized so early on with my channel that I was able to change it for the better. I don't think that people do so well with buckets of information tossed at them. And that's how I look at it is, you can always go back and rewind my videos and get a little bit more out of it. But putting things in, step-by-step guide for people is a great way to go. And I might try to do something like that with my channel where when I talk about this kind of stuff,
I do that.
Well, I do it. So then it's like going through the steps with the people on my channel. So then, if they want to do it, they can go through the same steps at the same pace and just get us all on the same page to be, getting through this together.